I'm the owner of a transport and infrastructure public affairs and stakeholder engagement company, but with a difference, because we also do workplace gender diversity. So basically, this works with my two passions, transport and gender equality. Before setting up JFG Comms, I worked for Transport for London, and over a period of 9 years, I built, developed and led their stakeholder engagement team, taking them from an organisation that, by their own admission, didn't really do much external engagement or didn't do it very well, and then over that period of time taking them to a position where they had a coalition of advocates willing to campaign for London's transport infrastructure and the funding to deliver it. And by the time I left, after almost 9 years, they had an award-winning stakeholder engagement team. So this session is all about how people's needs should drive infrastructure and services, and the focus of stakeholder engagement in doing that. So, and the answer is obviously people's needs should drive infrastructure and services, because all our projects are about people. As an industry, I think we're becoming more and more customer focused, which is undoubtedly a good thing. And that means that all the services and projects that we're planning, designing and delivering are all about the customer. They're all about the end user. So that means we have to make sure those people's needs are taken into account when we're designing our projects. And how do we do that? That's where stakeholder engagement comes in. And actually, stakeholder engagement is crucial to making sure our projects are a success. So what do we mean by stakeholder engagement? Now, and I don't want to dumb this down because I know we've got a lot of experts in the room. Could I just have a quick show of hands? How many of you do stakeholder engagement as part of your job? Yeah, quite a few of you. And how many people do jobs such as transport planning? How many engineers do we have? How many people working in related transport professions? Yeah, we're pretty much all transport experts. So I don't want to dumb it down, but you know how sometimes people talk about stakeholder engagement and they mean, well, there's a few different things that people mean by stakeholder engagement. So what I'm talking about here is engaging with and involving the groups that have an interest in your project. So what I call professional stakeholders or strategic stakeholders. So like industry bodies, trade associations, business representative groups, equalities groups, disabled people's organisations, charities, campaign groups, all those kinds of things. And why are these groups our stakeholders? Because they've got an interest in your project, they can help you sometimes to win support for it, to influence decision makers on your behalf, and yeah, they're the ones that can become trusted advocates. And your projects and the schemes you're working on affect their client group in some way. So their clients are the end customers and users of our transport projects. And the aim of stakeholder engagement is always to work together with you, so to deliver common objectives. So you're working together. So I don't like to think of stakeholders as groups that need to be managed or closed down. It's working together to deliver great results. And the next thing to come on to is advocacy. And what do I mean by advocates? I mean the stakeholder groups who will champion your project or your service. They will cheerlead for it, they will make the case for it, tell everyone how great it is. And third-party advocates can be hugely helpful in strengthening your campaign, making your messages to media and decision makers. And I believe that familiarity with an organisation breeds favourability. So with that careful engagement and relationship building, you can turn critical friends into trusted allies. You can turn angry customers into loyal supporters. I have done this, so you can definitely do it. And for me, advocacy is one of the key benefits, business benefits, of doing stakeholder engagement. your messages are going to be a lot more powerful if you've got a chorus of stakeholder advocates making the messages with you or for you. But as we all know, building advocacy is a long-term process. It doesn't happen overnight. You're not going to get it by cold calling someone and saying, oh, we're building this really controversial scheme. Any chance you could say something supportive to the press tomorrow? That's just not going to happen. It comes from putting in the time and the effort and the energy and building relationships now for stuff that you will need help with in the future. And that's what you need a stakeholder engagement team for, or people who do stakeholder engagement as part of their job. So get the relationships established and then bring stakeholders in early to engage them on your schemes, because obviously people are going to have, they're going to be much more likely to support something that they've helped to shape. And do infrastructure projects need stakeholder advocates to make them happen? Undoubtedly, yes. To give you a very well-known, I'm going to give you a rail example first actually, because it's very well known, the Crossrail project, and as I'm sure you will know, it took probably about 70 years to come to fruition. It suffered from stop-start political support, and the reason it actually in the end finally did happen is because business backed it. Business was willing to campaign for it and pay its share of the costs. So, stakeholder advocates are really crucial in moving these schemes forward. Road schemes obviously can be very controversial, fall into opposition from environmentalists. You need to make sure you get all the walking and cycling in, and advocacy can be hugely important in making sure these schemes happen. To give you a London example, so the Mayor is planning to pedestrianise Oxford Street, and the consultation for that was published this week. And something that caught my eye just last week was there was a letter, I did bring a copy of it, an open letter from 5 charities, so Living Streets, Age UK London, Campaign for Better Transport, 6 charities, RNIB, Sustrans and Transport for All. So all these charities have got slightly different aims. You've got age, disability, environment, but they're all united for a common theme. So it's a great example of charities campaigning in a coalition, but it's also a great example of the Mayor and Transport for London working with their stakeholders to achieve shared objectives. And there's a similar example, similar to Crossrail in terms of it's been on and off the agenda for quite a few years, and that's the Stonehenge tunnel, which has met with huge opposition. The preferred route was announced, Highways England announced that earlier this autumn, but earlier this year there was a letter published in The Guardian from National Trust, English Heritage and Historic England. So those are really powerful voices to have in support of that scheme happening. And actually their support is because Highways England and DFT actually listened to their views and amended the scheme, amended the preferred route, according to what the stakeholders had suggested. So that's an example of how, actually working with your stakeholders and listening to them and taking their views on board helps to build advocacy for a project. So here I just wanted to demonstrate that stakeholder advocates can be helpful and are needed at every stage of your project, right through from initial concept all the way through to delivery and operations. They can help you to shape the idea, test options. Essentially, you want to take your stakeholders on a journey with you, and then they can help to build advocacy, build that cross-party support, make the case to decision makers. During the construction phase, particularly if it's a big project, our projects can take a lot of time to build, and it can be a lot of pain in the short term, and you don't gain anything until the scheme's actually built. So stakeholders can be very useful in reminding their networks of the benefits. And then when you get to operations, your stakeholder groups can help you to applaud the launch, and then they can give you that continuous feedback to make sure you're continually improving your services. As I've mentioned, you need stakeholder support from a range of different sectors. I'm going to make special mention of the youth sector because young people are big users of transport, they have specific policy needs, and very importantly, they are going to be the future decision makers on these projects, they are going to be the future users, and the future engineering workforce. So we need to inspire young people through the groups that represent them. And also, very important to get our schemes right for disabled people. Obviously, you have a duty to promote equality and all those kinds of things, but actually there's another reason to do it, and that is because if we get our schemes right for disabled people, we actually get them right for everyone, because many of the adjustments that you will make for disabled people, like wheelchair access ramps and things like that, actually make life easier for everyone. And just a little bit on best practice. This, if you like, is my 8 top tips for delivering exemplary stakeholder engagement and to make sure that the infrastructure and services we're planning and designing actually are based on people's needs. First of all, you need to identify your stakeholders. You want to carry out a thorough mapping exercise, identify and understand your stakeholders, what their view is of your project or your organisation, their level of interest, how they want to be communicated with, and all that needs to inform your stakeholder engagement strategy. Then learning from other projects. That's obviously very important. A lot of the major projects have now learning legacy programs in place. So make sure you look at those, learn best practice, what worked, what didn't, and don't just stick to the road sector. Look at experience from other sectors as well, rail and aviation. Also speak to your stakeholders, what has worked for them in the past, how do they like to be engaged with. Having the conversation, okay, so this might sound obvious, but on many of the projects I've worked on, project teams sometimes are scared to talk to stakeholders, particularly if it's a contentious project and they know there's a lot of opposition. It can sometimes just seem too difficult to speak to people, but ignoring your stakeholder groups is the worst thing that you can do. All groups have the right to be heard, and actually, you should speak to them, have the conversation, and even if you can't meet their needs, actually talking to them and explaining why things can't be done, that actually goes a long way to making groups a lot happier. You're probably not going to get advocacy from it, but it might help to neutralise some of the criticism that you might be getting of the scheme. Engaging early and often, which I've touched on, but you should consult your stakeholders at every stage of the project. It helps you to get it right first time because your stakeholders' views will have been shaping things from the start, and actually that can help you to avoid costly mistakes later on by having to retrofit things that you hadn't thought of and it doesn't work for a particular group. And that, of course, gives stakeholders confidence that you're going to listen to them, you're going to take account of their requirements. I would always recommend going above and beyond what planning law requires, basically because you want to have a great scheme, not a good scheme, and you want to have this scheme that's an exemplar of stakeholder engagement. So you're not going to get that just by delivering the bare minimum. You want to go above and beyond. Engagement needs to be interactive and tailored to your audience. So, if you are doing public consultations, then absolutely you need to go into the heart of communities, pop-up stands in shopping centres, town hall meetings, those kind of things. But also when you're working with the more professional stakeholder groups, then you can do things like roundtables, summits, site visits, one-to-one meetings, loads of different things, briefings. And there's not a one size fits all. I think tailor it to your stakeholders, ask them how they want to be engaged with. And I personally think that smaller, more focused meetings work better because that's how you build those one-to-one relationships, those trusted relationships, and where you help to begin to develop that advocacy. Obviously, any engagement events you're doing need to be accessible. You need to have communications materials available in accessible formats, all of those kind of things. Technology offers great opportunities to show people what future schemes, like mock-ups of what schemes will look like. And social media, obviously a great opportunity too. I'm going to come on to that in a minute. Talked a lot about advocacy, but yeah, advocacy basically, you get it from building from delivering top quality, meaningful engagement, and it's fundamentally, it's all about building relationships and working together to achieve shared objectives. Be an advocate for your stakeholders. So this is hugely important. So many of you have said that you do stakeholder engagement as part of your job. So you'll be getting loads of intelligence, information, expertise from your stakeholders. But what you can do with that, is it getting back to the right people who are making the decisions on these projects? You know, are your stakeholders being heard by the right people at the right time? And that's the job of a stakeholder engagement professional, to make sure that those views are heard by your organisation or by your project director and acted upon. So that's very important, and that helps to build trust and relationships over time. And then finally, social media, obviously great opportunity. It enables you to have that two-way dialogue in real time, but also it means even the smallest of issues can be blown out of proportion. So always be aware of what your stakeholders are saying on social media and have a plan for how you will respond. So those are my top tips for delivering exemplary stakeholder engagement. Just to say also that the CIHT has its own guidance, which I've also got a copy of here, but you can find it at that link. And that just gives you a bit more detail on the public consultation side, on duty to consult, all those kind of things, and different techniques for running public consultations. So if you haven't had a look, I would recommend that you do. And then, as Ginny says, happy to take a couple of questions now if there are any burning questions, or otherwise we will go on to the next presentation and we'll just do the Q&A at the end. Yeah.
Yes, I'm sorry, Collins. How do you measure stakeholder engagement? You know, so many people will measure different things. You know, they measure, say, the number of. I've seen stakeholder engagement experts saying, "Well, I'll set you up 50 meetings a month," or something like that. Or some people will say it will be shown in the media coverage, or you know, and with social media, as you say, it's so disparate now. How can you? You know, in media there is a single Barcelona principles and everything, but there's no association of stakeholder management, is there? So, is it just, you know, you get a feel for it?
Well, it's a good question, and I'm glad you raised it actually, because it's something that, as a stakeholder engagement professional, sometimes you struggle within an organisation to justify yourself and the work that you're doing, because how do you measure it? And like you say, you could say, oh, I'm going to get you 50 meetings, but, you know, are they with the right people? What's the outcome? 50 meetings could actually be meaningless. Although, you know, it is a bit of both, because undoubtedly you do want to have those meetings and you want to log them. Something that I always recommend doing at the start of your stakeholder engagement program is a bit of a benchmarking exercise. So if you do a bit of a survey, you know, so map who your stakeholders are, and then go out to them with a questionnaire. Ideally, you would get someone independent to do that, and go out to them with a questionnaire about what is the level of engagement just now, what are their views of the project, how do they like to be engaged with, and then you can do that same survey again in a couple of years' time or a year's time or whatever to track progress and change over time.
Okay, thank you for that. I found that really helpful.
Thanks.
Just thinking about stakeholder engagement going forward, one of the things that I found really helpful is if you actually have a good stakeholder engagement, like you were saying, perhaps go the extra mile. I did a lot of work years ago in the centre of Nottingham. We pedestrianised Nottingham, whatever, and we found that after we'd done a scheme and a couple of schemes, a lot of good stakeholder engagement, they were very much advocates for the next phases that we were able to do. So the knock-on effect was just great. You know, they were like singing praises of the next phases before we actually had even really consulted them. So it does actually develop. You know, if you get the right stakeholders and you are able to spend that extra time with them, it's worth it, as you said earlier.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I completely agree. Yeah, you build the relationships now, you get the advocacy for one scheme, and then, as you say, they move on and they cheerlead the next scheme. So they're starting to do your job for you and helping to get the scheme through. And yeah, couldn't agree more.
Yeah, thanks. That's good.
So,
Thank you.
cheers.
Oh, sorry. One more question.
Hello, Phil Carey from Transport Focus. Sorry to hold things up a bit, but overall session is around end users and their needs. I'm a bit concerned that what you're setting out as stakeholders may not be the same as the end users. It may just be the more vocal, better organised interests. How do you actually ensure you reach the end users of a road scheme?
It's a good question. So, as I said at the start, I'm talking about the kind of professional strategic stakeholder groups which represent the end users, because the end users are their clients and their members. So like disabled people's organisations represent disabled people as users of the scheme. But always in projects I would recommend to have sort of two lots of engagement going on. So your engagement with the strategic stakeholders and then the public engagement as well. But they're different but related things. And the two-pronged approach makes sure you reach everyone. But as I said at the start, I just wanted to sort of clarify that I was talking about the strategic stakeholders. Yeah, and I think from an advocacy point of view, it's the well-organised groups that are going to help to be advocates and move schemes forward. But equally, don't underestimate the power of individuals to either be advocates or to completely derail a scheme through a protest campaign.